The autobiography is a verbal account of some events from the life of Saint Ignatius as narrated to Father Gonzalez de Camara. The tradition of the church reveals autobiographies of various saints. It's the hagiography, which is a genre which refers to the lives of saints, reveals to us various autobiographies. And generally, in an autobiography, you have a certain pattern: a good life, from there, a life of going away from God, a moment of inflection where God enters the life of the person, and then once again, a return to God. That is generally a pattern which we see in the autobiographies. To some extent, that is followed even in the autobiography of St. Ignatius. During the course of his life, St. Ignatius had spoken about his past to an intimate circle of friends. We see that the companions, various companions have written about the early stages of their friendship and how the society was formed, would refer to the fact that Ignatius would speak about his life, his early life, with a great deal of enthusiasm. However, he was very reluctant about writing or narrating an autobiography. So he spoke about his life, but an autobiography, and despite repeated attempts, he refused to entertain this thought. Very likely, this request of Nadal, which is also there in the translation of Paramananda Divarkar, took place in the year 1552. 1551, Nadal was out. Finally, one day, when Father Camara approached him with the problem of vainglory, he relented and began to narrate the events of his life. Now, the goal of narrating the events of his life was not to say something about himself, it was to say something about God. He wanted to say how God had worked through his life. So, the goal of this narration was primarily to show how God had been leading him throughout his life. He also wished to instruct Father Camara on the issue of vainglory and to fulfill the petition of Father Nadal. The narration was interrupted twice, and only by the end of 1555, mind you, in 1556, St. Ignatius goes to his eternal reward. So, towards the end of 1555, this is complete. It primarily deals with the period of his life from the time of his conversion to the moment of the foundation of the Society of Jesus. The last part, the few numbers, is more of an epilogue rather than a detailed autobiography. The narration of St. Ignatius has its own share of difficulties. From the time, the autobiography was not very well known till the 20th century. And this has partly to do with Francis Borgia, St. Francis Borgia, popularizing the biography of Ignatius written by Ribadenera. It was more in keeping with the genre, the hagiography of the lives of saints, and therefore, in order to uh, propagate a certain understanding of Ignatius, we see that St. Francis Borgia and the subsequent generals promoted more the biography of St. Ignatius by Ribadenera. The title autobiography has given rise to various debates. Some do not consider this work to be an autobiography because it is not the narration of an entire life, but only the depiction of some significant events with a specific goal in mind. There are factual errors. Very prominently, as we start the autobiography, you have until the age of 26. That itself is an error. Prominent, so related to the birth of Saint Ignatius. Also, there are times when Gonzalez de Camara is not immediately writing after Saint Ignatius has dictated something, so he writes it later on. So, therefore, we are not too sure whether whether Camara is actually being completely faithful to what Ignatius has said. More or less, he tries to recall and write. Some details of the autobiography are incomplete and have to be completed by other biographies of St. Ignatius. When we speak about the life of Ignatius in the initial years, we rely on four sources. Four sources. The first, the biography of Ignatius by Linus. In 1547, when Polanco became the secretary, Polanco says, in order to know the charism, we need to know the founder better. And that is why he will send letters to the early companions and tell them to write something about what they know of St. Ignatius. Linus will respond. And Linus's biography is the first biography that we have. Polanco, with tidbits, informations from here and there, will develop upon the biography of Linus, and we have the second biography by Polanco. The third one is the autobiography, autobiography under, in inverted commas. And the fourth is the one by Pedro Ribadeneira. But before going to Ribadeneira, there is one more source. When Nadal went to Portugal and Spain, the Jesuits there told Nadal, tell us something about Father Master Ignatius. And there are what are called the Platicas or the discourses of Nadal, which also give us sufficient information about the life of Saint Ignatius. So if you want to, putting aside Ribadeneira's biography, we have four sources: Linus, Polanco, the autobiography, and the Platicas or the discourses of Nadal. Despite all these discrepancies that we find in the autobiography, it must be said that the autobiography provides a succinct and extremely profound insight into the life of St. Ignatius. It invites the reader to embark on a personal pilgrimage in order to discern the ways and means of God's intervention in the life of an individual. Why do we find the autobiography having this echo with us? Because we've, in some way, we find also how Saint Ignatius's journey resembles a bit our own journey, how God has been guiding us and leading us as well, a little later. Now, having given this brief introductory remarks, let us now go to the autobiography proper. St. Ignatius was born in 1491. Now, if you go by what the autobiography states, Ignatius should have been born in 1495. But there is enough evidence, especially the testimony of Maria Garin, the vet nurse of Ignatius, who told others that Ignatius was born in 1491. There are other secondary evidences also which show that Ignatius was born in 1491. The autobiography is conspicuous by its silence about the childhood, youth, and adolescence of St. Ignatius. Does it mean Ignatius did not narrate his youth or probably his childhood to González de Cámara? Let us listen to what González de Cámara's preface tells us. He says, so in September, I do not remember how many days, the father called me and began to tell me about his whole life and his youthful escapades clearly and distinctly and with all the details. So we have Cámara himself says that Ignatius has spoken about his youth, the period before the incident at Pamplona and so on, and it is quite likely he has narrated that, probably also given details, because that was the style of the various saints. And Ignatius, in order to give an impression of how sinful a man he was, again, in some way, basing himself on the confessions of Saint Ignatius, of Saint Augustine, he would definitely have gone into details about his sinful life in order to contrast that with the new life that he had begun living. So it is very likely that Ignatius has narrated things about his youth, which probably because of a fear that they would not be edifying enough have been taken out. The prologue of Cámara indicates that St. Ignatius probably and quite certainly narrated his early life, which has not been preserved for posterity. Now, Ignatius was born to Beltran Yáñez de Oña y Loyola and Maria de Licona and was the youngest child. There were 13 children. 10 were of Maria, and probably 3 were what today we call natural children, which were children of some other women. We do not know the exact year of the death of his mother, but it is presumed that she died when Ignatius was very young. He was nursed by Maria Garin, the wife of a blacksmith whose testimony was important in order to ascertain the year of St. Ignatius' birth. On the 2nd of September 1498, his brother married Magdalena de Arauz, a very important lady. She would play the role of his foster mother and in some ways linked to Arauz, who would go on to become the first provincial of Spain, who was to become a foster mother to him. He grew up with a love for the land, its music, dance, and fruits. His father wanted him to take up a career in administration. And here I would like to elaborate this point. Uh, Today, modern authors would say the image of Saint Ignatius as a soldier or a knight is not an accurate image. Ignatius's training was in order to prepare him for administrative service. However, it is important to keep in mind that administrative service in the 16th century consisted in an ability to be a man of letters and also to handle arms. And hence he responded to the request of his friend Juan Velasquez de Cuellar, an upright man, a man with tremendous influence and esteem in the court, who invited Beltran to send his son in order to be a page. So he took him under his care, prepared him for an administrative life in the court. He promised him that he would train him in all that was necessary in order to further his administrative and courtly career. They were very good friends. Juan Velasquez de Cuellar, the royal treasurer, and Ignatius. It is believed that around the year 1506 or 1507, which means when he was around 15 years of age or 16 years of age, Ignatius left his house in Loyola and moved to Arevalo, center Spain, where he was to spend the next 11 years of his life. Mind you, these 11 years are very significant because, except for Rome when he was general and his childhood in Loyola, 15 or 16 years, this is the longest period of time that he will spend in a place. It would have a tremendous formative value in his life. The next important period where he would live the longest would be Paris. So, this, in the order of significance, in terms of where he stayed in his life, the longest would be Rome. The second would be Loyola, where he was born. The third would be Arevalo, and the fourth would be Paris. During his stay, he picked up the necessary skills of, now pay attention to the skills he has picked up: reading, writing, and decent manners. Because these were requisites for a person in the court, which were requisites for those who desired a career in the court. It can be assumed that he accompanied Juan Velasquez de Cuellar in his many official journeys. He would also have personally met King Ferdinand on various occasions, including the 7 times that King Ferdinand stayed in the house of Juan Velasquez de Cuellar when he visited Arevalo. Now, I'm giving a bit of a background of his life because it's important to understand uh, what happened to him prior to Pamplona. I remember uh, Garcia Lomas, an Ignatian expert in Spain, saying that before the conversion which began in Pamplona, there were 3 other, we could call, moments of conversion. And in what I'm going to read now, these 3 moments will be highlighted. Now, the first documented incident in his life during this period took place during the carnival in Aspatia in the year 1515, when he was charged for committing a serious crime and had to take recourse to his immunity as a priest in order to escape the law. If you participated in the prayer service organized by Bombay Province on the 12th of this month, there is a mention made of this by Father um, Vernon. He makes a reference to a police complaint made against Ignatius. He was in the custody of the Bishop of Pamplona for a month and was finally released. This would be the first time where he realized, he something is not okay. That 1 month would have made him reflect about what he had done and so on. Around the same time, his nose began to emit a foul smell, and the women whom it desired to impress kept away from him. This lasted again for about a month until he was finally healed. And once he was healed, he was back to his old ways. So, for about a month, people kind of avoided him, they kept away from him. But a very important moment would be 1517. After the death of King Ferdinand in 1516, the new King Charles transferred the revenues from Arevalo and some other towns which were earmarked for the royal household towards the maintenance of the widowed queen. After the King Ferdinand's wife, Queen Isabel, died, he married a second time. Now, here a brief mention about three towns. The revenue from three towns was supposed to go to the king, to the royal treasury. Now, when the, the, the queen dies, Queen Isabel, and when King Ferdinand dies, the new king, Carlos V, transfers the revenues of Arevalo and the two other towns to the second wife of King Ferdinand. This was opposed by Juan Velasquez, who said these revenues are meant only for the king. Now, it's a technical point here, but I want to point out how, in this particular case, Juan Velasquez de Cuellar, the royal treasurer, was upright. He was upright. He was standing for what had been decided. But the king, a young lad of 17, Carlos V, would say, no, let it go to the widowed queen. Velasquez resisted this move and fell from grace. In this process, he lost his prestige, titles, and property because he opposed it, and there was a war. He lost the war, and with this, Ignatius's hopes of getting into the court, stepping on the influence of Juan Velasquez de Cuellar, are destroyed. Maria de Velasco, his wife, tells him, my son, you have no hope if you remain here. So go to the Duke of Nájera, who was the Viceroy of Navarre. This is significant because of that he will go to Pamplona. And therefore she gives him 500 ducats, 2 horses, and sends him to the Duke of Nájera. He makes that journey from the center of Spain to the north of Spain, and as he is walking, his hopes of making it big in the court in some way have been destroyed. So he goes to Nájera. Once again, he kind of re-establishes himself. He is very competent. He is competent in the art of negotiation, and that is why he is the Duke of Nájera will send him when there are some very delicate matters to be discussed, and so on and so forth. Finally, there is an uprising by the commoners against the lords. And taking advantage of this uprising, the French will attack Pamplona, and they will and in fact, since the loyalties of the people of Navarre was divided, they were with the King of France and also with the King of Castile. So when the French entered from the Pyrenees, the people of Navarre would welcome them with open arms. Now they reached Pamplona. In a few days, no one really puts up a resistance, and they reach Pamplona. Now Pamplona has a fortress, and in that fortress, in one particular area, there is a garrison with extra protection. When the French reach the gates of Pamplona, Pamplona surrenders. The city of Pamplona surrenders, not that garrison. The garrison is where now they are deciding what to do. They are around 1,000 soldiers against 11,000 to 12,000 French soldiers. They stand no chance. So therefore Ignatius decides, they have to decide. The commander is of the opinion it's better to surrender. But then Ignatius says, let us fight. It is not just, a romantic idea of let us fight. There is a past history in Ignatius's family. Ignatius's great grand uncle, in a similar situation on the border of France, in a place called Fuenterrabía, where they stood no chance, but they were in a garrison, they had that extra protection. They held out until reinforcements came, and then they came out there acclaimed as heroes. So there is this background which Ignatius is aware of, and that is why he decides that no, we will stand our ground, and hoping that reinforcements would come in, and then the acclaim, the glory that he was hoping to receive. That would not happen. The bombardment would begin in no time because the reinforcements were there fighting the civil war which had taken place in Castile. They will come around the 28th of June, recapture Pamplona, but by the time it's almost a month and 8 days that Ignatius has been injured. So, okay, this is so far about the background. So, you see how uh, the idea that Ignatius was a very sinful man is a bit of an exaggeration. He was a decent man of his times, no doubt about that. He was a person with a lot of vigor. He came from a family of fighters. His eldest brother died fighting. His second brother would take care of the property. His third brother died fighting. His fourth brother died fighting. One in the low countries, Netherlands and so on. One died in the Crusades. One went to the Americas and died. So there is that whole tradition of fighting, and to die in a battle was considered to be something glorious. It was not considered to be something, Ignatius would certainly have desired to die in that battle of Pamplona in order to continue with the great tradition of his family. So Ignatius was, of course, he was a person who had his relationships with women, who loved to fight, who loved power, and so on and so forth. But to paint Ignatius as someone terribly sinful, I think, is not an accurate depiction of Ignatius. He was a man of his times, and that is it. Now we come to, I will go straight to the text of the autobiography. If you have the autobiography with you, you could probably follow that as well. I think I have about 15 minutes, 15 to minutes or so. I shall try to now follow the text of the autobiography. I would like to frame these three chapters of the autobiography in the context of a kenotic process that Ignatius is going through. The first is Ignatius. In number one of the autobiography, you have Ignatius there offering resistance. He gives reasons to the commander and so on and so forth. And then in number one, verses 4 and 5, he says, sub points 4 and 5, he says, after the bombardment had lasted a good while, a shot struck him on one leg, shattering it completely. And as the cannonball passed between both the legs, the other also was badly injured. And with his fall, those in the fortress soon surrendered to the French. Now, there are varying interpretations how long they continued to fight. We like to believe that immediately as Ignatius was wounded, everybody surrendered, because that's Laturia was done a lot of research in this, says not immediately, probably between 8 hours, the fighting continued for another 8 hours more, or probably 3 days more. It's more likely it lasted about 8 hours because the garrison stood no chance against the heavy cannons of the French. So it's more likely that when Ignatius was injured, they immediately took him on a stretcher and put him elsewhere. They continued to fight for some more time, and they surrendered very soon. Has any conversion taken place in Ignatius at this point of time? Very likely, no. Has a process begun? Yes. Once he is injured, he is face to face with death. And there, well, in that moment of death, when one experiences one's finiteness, generally is a moment of reality. And a process has begun. He has never been so close to death as this very moment. Again, on the 24th of June, a month later, he will again be close to death. Later on in the third chapter, again, he will speak of 3 other moments when he is to death, and I shall make a comment on that. So for the first time, he is really face to face with death, and therefore it is certainly a moment where something has taken place. But to believe that he is totally a new person would be rather presumptuous. It would be over the top. Anyway, he is taken in a litter to Loyola. There he is once again attended to, and he is at the point of death. And he is, the doctors have said if he does not improve, that is the end of him. So he is at the point of death, but then he recovers and he believes it was the intervention of Saint Peter, the feast of Saint Peter and Paul, where that conversion would take place, the recovery would take place, I'm sorry, and then it would go on. Now, number 6, number 8 of the autobiography is a very important number, but I would like to draw your attention to number 6. As he read them over many times, he became rather fond of what he found written there. What is he reading here? The life of Christ and the lives of saints. But interrupting his reading, he sometimes stopped to think about the things he had read, and at other times about the things of the world that he used to think of before. Of the many foolish ideas that occurred to him, one had taken such a hold on his heart that he was absorbed in thinking about it for 2 or 3 and 4 hours without realizing it. He imagined, now this is what he's imagining. He imagined what he would do in the service of a certain lady. Very clear. Here he's not speaking about wars, fighting wars and gaining glory. No, it is clearly about most likely Princess Catalina. He is thinking about a certain lady. The means he would take and so on, so he could go to the place where she lived, the quips, the words he would address to her, etc., the feats of arms he would perform in a service. He became so infatuated with this that he did not consider how impossible of attainment it would be, because the lady was not of ordinary nobility, nor a countess, nor a duchess, but her station was higher than any of these. This point is depicted very beautifully in the movie Inigo de Loyola, where he writes about all this, but at one point of time he comes face to face with the fact he cannot marry this lady. He is just of the lower nobility, she is a princess. And at some point of time, as he is convalescing, he knows he cannot marry her. I said I'm framing this entire process in the process of a kenosis. At some point, he gives up this lady. He knows she cannot be attained by him. He can't marry her. He gives up that idea. Giving up the lady he loved might have been a very painful moment for him, and the movie Inigo de Loyola brings out that struggle very clearly, till at one moment of time he just buries his head in the pillow because he knows he cannot marry her. She is of a higher nobility and he is not of the same rank. One moment of kenosis. Now, we come to the second moment of giving up his idea of a career, a successful career in the court. And when does this take place? This is the famous number 8 of the autobiography. So he has been reading, thinking about that lady. He has been reading about the lives of saints and life of Christ. And he is thinking about imitating the saints. Now, these thoughts lasted a while and so on and so forth. The succession of such diverse thoughts. The two thoughts are about the lady and imitating the saints. The succession of such diverse thoughts lasted for quite some time, and he always dwelt at length on the thought that turned up, either of the worldly exploits he wished to perform or of these others of God that came to his imagination, until he tired of it and put it aside and turned to other matters. Now we need to pay attention. When is the point Ignatius begins to think about imitating the saints? It is when something more appealing comes to him, when there is a new frame of reference. So he gives up the past. He gives up the past when something more appealing comes to him. That is the time when slowly a paradigm shift will begin to take place in his life. Yet there was this difference. When he was thinking of those things of the world, he took much delight in them, but afterwards he was tired, etc. He found himself, he uses the word dry and dissatisfied. exactly the same words he will use in the rules of discernment, the first week. But when he thought of going to Jerusalem barefoot and of eating nothing but plain vegetables and practicing the rigors, now here again the words of the rules of discernment come. He was consoled and he remained satisfied and joyful. He sees a qualitative difference in the satisfaction that both these um, uh, possibilities offer to him. This is where he will let go, he will empty himself, he will give up the idea of a life in the court. Now, still, there has been a shift in the object from a worldly king to the eternal king. But has there been a shift in the subject? Not really. He's still the self centered Ignatius, but there has been a shift in the object of his life, the focus of his life, from the temporal king towards the eternal king. So this shift has taken place. He has given up that lady he loved. He has given up his ambition in the court. He has given up that. Now we shall move to another kenosis, another giving up. Um, Number 12, the last number of the first chapter. For this reason mentioned above, and because he was wholly absorbed in the journey he was planning to make, he has made a decision to make a journey to the Holy Land. And that matter did not have much to be dealt with until his return. He did not look into, rather finding that he had strength. Now he tells his brother, Sir, the Duke of Nahera, as you know, is aware now that I am well. So it's the logical thing. He has recuperated. He has to go back to his Lord. Just here, a footnote I would like to add here. The difference at that time, they were building a professional army in Spain. The difference between a professional soldier and a knight is a soldier would go when there was a war to fight. A knight would always be with the Lord. This is important for us when we look at the meditation of the eternal king or the kingdom meditation. We are called to imitate a knight who is always with the Lord. The conmigo word is used by St. Ignatius there. We don't do something for the Lord or we engage in mission sporadically when there is a need. We are always with the Lord, being with the Lord. So Ignatius says, now I am okay. The Duke of Nahera, since I am his knight, would be expecting me. Now his brother took him to one room and then to another, and with much feeling begged him not to throw himself away and to consider what hopes had been placed in him by the people and how much he could achieve, and such other words. Sorry, all with the purpose of dissuading him from such intention and so on. But he has answered in such a way that without departing from the truth, for he was very scrupulous about that important moment, he slipped away from his brother. Again, he has let gone, emptied himself of his family relations. So you see how in the first chapter of the autobiography, we have 3 levels of kenosis: giving up the lady of his love, giving up his ambition of a courtly life, giving up his family. Let us now move to the second chapter, which at times has been very little analyzed. That is, he is on the road to Montserrat. He is walking, and as he is going, he comes across the moor, the famous incident of the moor. So here again, I would invite you, since we are short of time, kindly read number 15. In number 15, we find Ignatius is very angry, and he uses the word, various emotions came over him. So he's very angry because the Moor has, in some way, he feels, insulted the Blessed Virgin Mary. But what is important here is, since he is unsure, since he is uncertain, he does not take a decision. What has he let go on? What has he emptied himself in this point? His will. His will. Very often, he has been someone who was a very strong-willed person. If he decided something, he did it. But here, he is letting go of his will. Why? Because now he is not concerned about what Inigo wants to do. He is more concerned about what is God asking of me? What is God asking of me? And that is why he will let go of his will. Now we come to the most important and the defining moment of his life. That is his experience at Manresa. We will see from number 19 onwards, 19 to 25, it is a letting go of something else. A third level and the most important letting go and emptying will take place at Manresa. 19 to 25, he will be taught, not that he will do it, he will be taught. God will teach him how to let go of his self. The self emptying will take place here. And this is why, when we look at the 65 years of the life of Ignatius, we will find that the 11 months at Manresa are the defining moment of his life. There is a before and there is an after. In Manresa, he will empty himself. His self is given up. And that is why here we will see how from 19 to 19, 20, 21 and so on, continuously he will give up himself. And it's very curious to, I would invite you, I'm sure as we come towards the Feast of St. Ignatius, this is a very important text for us to realize how to empty ourselves. And this will go on all through his life. Giving up the lady of his love was something which took place in a moment. Not really a moment, but it was a short phase. Giving up his ambition of being a courtier again took a short time. Giving up his family a little longer, but he could give it up. Giving up his will and then giving up himself would be a lifelong process. Very interestingly, after number 25, we have 26 and 27 and 28 onwards, the 5 illuminations that he has. After that, he will speak about 3 moments of his death. We will see that from number 32 onwards. In 32, he will speak of later on a moment in Manresa when he was at the point of death. 33, he will speak again about when he was going to Valencia. Again, there was a violent storm and he was at the point of death. In the year 1550, again, he's at a point very sick and he's at a point of death. Why is he speaking about these 3 moments of death here immediately after Manresa? He's saying, in Manresa, I died to myself. Later on, there were moments of physical death which threatened me, but I died to myself in Manresa. I died to myself in Manresa in order to live for Christ from then on. This is a new Ignatius who will come out of Manresa.